Well, yesterday Harris picked Tim Walz, the Minnesota governor, as her running mate, and I have a little bit to say, not a whole bunch, but I think out of any of the people that she was going to pick, he's probably the one I like the most. I'm not entirely knowledgeable of Andy Bashir. I know that Shapiro was considered the front runner to some individuals and commentators, and I thought he would hurt her chances. There is this idea that if you pick a running mate from some swing state or whatever, it's going to make it towards easier to win the states, even though data has shown that really it does not determine it. His position on Israel has infuriated a lot of progressives who just find him to be too much of a Netanyahu, stooge. And we don't even have to talk about the goofy transportation secretary and just how nobody would be excited for him. But no, Walls has a record I really like. I like that he's a member of teacher unions, that he's gone and been on the picket line with protesting workers, um, that he called for a ceasefire in the Israeli-Hamas conflict. I've liked what I've seen so far. He's not someone who is really on, because when I think of Minnesota politics, like just politicians from Minnesota, active ones, so not like historically like Humphrey or Mondale, I think of probably Klobuchar because she's been the senator from that state for, you know, quite a while now, over 10 years, 15, 16, somewhere around that number. So I would think of her most likely when just thinking of current politicians from that state. But he's been a very pleasant surprise. And I do think that out of those options, he was the most progressive choice that Harris could have picked, which led some people to think that she wasn't going to pick him. I was actually saying that when I watched Jenk from TYT's commentary on this, he mentioned that he believed if she picked Shapiro, Shapiro could be the one that actually tries to get an Israeli Palestine peace settlement because he loves Israel so much, and said it was like Nixon goes to China. And I'm like, in my view, that's him coping. Like he's like hoping for this thing that there's no reason to believe will happen. In terms of just someone being so pro one side that you couldn't imagine them like ever seeking a fair balance between one and the other. But no, this is I think going to help her. Um, Minnesota as a state is a lot redder than people think. It's a state that Trump just barely lost in 2016. It's had the longest record of voting for Democrats because it was the only one that didn't flip for Reagan in '84. But it's a lot redder than people would be convinced or be inclined to think, and that is something that I believe the Democrats are kind of worried about. But no, I think Waltz has a lot of appeal to just rural voters, and even if he's not necessarily from some state that is, and Minnesota really should be considered a swing state or at least an adjacent one because it's got a higher chance of turning red than somewhere like Florida at this point has a turn in blue. That's what I believe. But even if he's not from a swing state in particular, he still is going to tap into a voter base that I don't think Harris is accustomed to. Because Harris's whole thing is that with progressives, a lot of us don't trust her. A lot of us will point to different parts of her record that we have a problem with. And this is stuff that the Republicans don't mention because they know it makes her look like them, basically, right? The law and order stuff of, oh, I'm gonna put parents in jail for their children's truancy and use prisoners to do cheap labor in California so we don't have to pay people as much money. Just things like that, which make a lot of progressives kind of just like kind of be grossed out. But Waltz doesn't seem to have any of that, and for that reason, it is making a lot of people believe that she's apparently serious about trying to court the left wing of her party, which is a group that gets ignored more often than not, or spoken of disparagingly by politicians. It's funny. This is kind of like the opposite of the Vance pick, where it's like Vance is the theoretical. Like when Trump picked him, he's probably thinking, "Oh, someone who can take over for me in 2028." Even though I believe more likely than not, Tucker Carlson would be a better pick for that, but that's besides the point. And with Waltz, it's this. It kind of reminds me a little bit of, I guess, Clinton Gore, where it's like two people of a similar age, and neither of them are like from the South or some other like region that um, the Democratic Party is like serious about trying to regain, right? But in spite of that, they have these. They're like still considered like the choice is seen as unconventional a little bit because people are saying in some corners Shapiro would have been the better choice. Shapiro would have been the better choice, but it still is like something that feasibly it could win. And if it does win, it's going to be seen as you subverted a convention and did what you thought was right and got the result that you wanted. Oh, and of course it'll be really fun to see Vance versus Waltz in the debate. That'll be real comedic. I think Waltz will destroy him. I know Vance was on TV earlier today talking about Waltz's apparently lack of military experience or his unproven valor or some kind of crap, and isn't it sad that like because like in this speech that Vance gave earlier today, he's like, "Oh, Waltz has he's a left wing radical or what?" It's like, but can you tell us what is so radical about him? It would be nice. Like I'd love for some actual policy discussions because everything just turns to these personality tests. So yeah, I think Waltz helps Harris more than any of the people that she realistically could have picked. Um, and as things stand, I'm more convinced now than at any point in the last few weeks that she could defeat Trump. Like I held on to the belief that Trump was going to lose, right, until that debate happened. Um, but there's a lot of momentum just building around that campaign, the 38 million she raised since Waltz got announced as the VP, for example. And I do believe that is translating to an excitement and enthusiasm from people to support her. So we'll see what happens.